Humanity had always been a quiet, distant force in the galaxy, just a speck among the stars. The major species of the universe had always looked at Earth with indifference, and many had assumed that humans were weak, insignificant. But the Galactic Council had made a fatal mistake. They underestimated humanity. The Vanguard, a massive human warship, drifted in the void of space, surrounded by the sharp, cold silence of the universe. Inside, the crew worked tirelessly, unaware of what was unfolding beyond their perception. For decades, humans had kept to themselves, exploring the vast expanse of space, but never fully engaging with the other galactic civilizations. They weren't part of the Council, not because they couldn't join, but because they didn't trust the Council's authority. But now something had changed. The humans were beginning to awaken, to realize that they could no longer remain hidden. And the Galactic Council had just given them the reason to act. It all began when the Council issued an order, a directive to send a message to humanity, demanding that they submit to the Council's laws. The message had come through a well-known galactic channel, a routine exchange between races. The Council had no idea how foolish their decision would prove to be. They believed they could force humanity into submission, just like the dozens of other species they controlled. They thought humanity would bow down, but they were wrong. The Vanguard's captain, Captain Rivers, stood in front of a holographic screen. He had just received the message. His face was unreadable as he watched the words flicker in front of him. The voice of the Council's representative echoed in his mind, demanding humanity's compliance and threatening dire consequences if they refused. How dare they? Rivers muttered to himself. The pride of humanity, the strength they had kept hidden for so long, surged within him. The galaxy was about to learn a harsh lesson, and humanity would be the one to deliver it. Lieutenant Holt, standing nearby, watched as Rivers clenched his fists in frustration. She had known the captain long enough to see when something was about to change. "Sir," she said cautiously, "you don't seem surprised." Rivers turned to her, his eyes burning with intensity. "Surprised? No. I knew this day would come. We've been out there, in the shadows, watching. Now it's time for them to see who we really are." Lieutenant Holt nodded. "You think they'll regret this?" Captain Rivers smirked. "Regret doesn't begin to cover it. They've made a fatal mistake." Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council had no idea what they had just ignited. They had expected to dominate the humans, to force them into submission. But in doing so, they had unknowingly woken up something much larger than themselves. Humanity wasn't just another species in the galaxy. They were survivors, warriors, and their resolve had always been their greatest strength. As the news of the Council's threat spread, something stirred in the hearts of every human across the galaxy. On Earth, in the cities and outposts scattered throughout space, every person who heard the message felt a pulse of energy, a shift in the air. It was as though the universe had just snapped, and something far more dangerous had been set loose. The humans had lived under the radar for so long that they had forgotten just how strong they were. They had forgotten the wars they fought, the battles they won, the impossible odds they had overcome. It was time to remind the galaxy of humanity's true nature. On the Vanguard, Rivers looked at his crew. "This is it. They've made the mistake of thinking we're weak. We're not, and we're going to make sure they understand that." The crew gathered around, their faces a mixture of anticipation and resolve. They knew the journey ahead would be perilous. The Galactic Council wasn't just any enemy. They controlled an enormous military force, with fleets and armies spanning across the galaxy. The humans would be up against a seemingly unbeatable foe. But no one on the Vanguard flinched. They understood. Humanity had been pushed to the edge. And when humans were pushed to the edge, they fought back. "We'll show them what happens when you mess with humanity," Rivers declared, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of impending battle. "We'll take back what is ours, and we'll make sure they never forget who we are." The ship rumbled as it powered up, its engines roaring to life. The Vanguard was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's strength and defiance. It was a reminder that Earth, the planet they had once abandoned, would rise again. As the Vanguard set its course toward the galactic heart of the Council's domain, Holt stood by Rivers, her thoughts racing. She had fought alongside these men and women for years, and she had seen them overcome impossible odds. But this was different. This wasn't just a war for survival. This was a war for respect, for the very identity of humanity. And they would fight with everything they had. The universe, once so vast and untouchable, suddenly seemed small. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the Galactic Council was about to learn it the hard way. As the Vanguard disappeared into the depths of space, heading toward the unknown, a sense of anticipation filled the air. This was the beginning of something far greater than a mere conflict. This was the moment when humanity would prove its worth. The Galactic Council had made a fatal mistake. They thought they could control humanity. They thought they could break them. But humanity was waking up, and they would never bow to anyone again. The awakening had begun. The Vanguard was now in full motion, heading straight toward the heart of the Galactic Council's empire. As the ship cut through the vast reaches of space, Captain Rivers stood at the helm, his hands steady on the controls. The crew moved quickly, preparing for what was sure to be the fight of their lives. Captain Rivers had always known that this day would come. For years, humanity had been quiet, observant. They had watched as the Galactic Council dominated the stars, believing the humans to be nothing more than an afterthought. But humanity had always been more than that. They had fought wars, survived against impossible odds, and now they were about to show the universe just how wrong it was to ignore them. The message the Council had sent was a challenge, a test. They thought humanity would bow to their will, frightened and helpless. But in their arrogance, they had made a mistake they would soon regret. The Vanguard sensors blinked as they entered the outer rim of Council space. The lights on the ship dimmed as the crew moved into position. It was time to make their move. "We're close," Lieutenant Holt said, her voice calm but with a noticeable edge of anticipation. "The Council fleet is in position. They won't be expecting us." Rivers turned to her with a tight smile. "That's the beauty of it, Lieutenant. They've never seen anything like us." The Vanguard was a marvel of human engineering, built specifically for this moment. It wasn't just a warship. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience. Armed with weapons far more advanced than anything the Council had ever faced, it was a weapon of calculated chaos, a vessel capable of turning the tide of battle. The Council's fleet was formidable, but they were about to face the most unpredictable species in the galaxy. Humanity's strength didn't lie in raw power alone. It was in their creativity, their resourcefulness, and their determination to survive. As they closed in on the fleet, Rivers addressed his crew over the ship's intercom. "This is it. We've come too far to back down now. The galaxy is about to witness what happens when humanity is pushed too far. Remember, we're not just fighting for our survival. We're fighting for our place in the stars. Let them see who we are." The ship rumbled as the first wave of enemy ships appeared on the horizon. The Council's ships, sleek and imposing, were lined up in perfect formation, ready to crush anything that dared to stand in their way. They were used to being the dominant force, the ones who controlled the galaxy. But humanity wasn't backing down. Not this time. The first shot came from the Vanguard, a laser so powerful that it split through the darkness of space, slamming into the nearest Council ship. The ship exploded in a flash of light, disintegrating before the crew's eyes. The Council hadn't even fired a shot before their first ship was gone. The battle had begun. "That's one down," Lieutenant Holt said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. "Keep pushing forward. They won't stop until they've destroyed us, so we need to hit them harder." The Vanguard fired again, its weapons blazing as it tore through the enemy lines. The Council ships, now in disarray, tried to regroup, but they couldn't match the human speed. Humanity wasn't just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with ingenuity. On the Vanguard, The crew worked in perfect sync, dodging enemy fire, launching counterattacks, and maneuvering the ship with pinpoint precision. Every move was calculated, every shot fired with purpose. The Council's fleet, despite their technological superiority, was beginning to crumble. But the Council wasn't going to give up easily. As the battle raged on, a massive flagship appeared from the shadows, the Imperium. It was the crown jewel of the Council's fleet, the largest and most powerful ship in their arsenal. With its advanced shielding and firepower, it was a ship capable of taking down entire fleets. The Vanguard's crew exchanged looks of determination. This was the moment they had been preparing for. "All hands, brace for impact," Captain Rivers ordered. "We're not backing down now. We take the Imperium down. And the galaxy will know what happens when you mess with humanity." With that, the Vanguard sped toward the Imperium, dodging blasts as the enemy flagship opened fire. The humans knew the odds were stacked against them, but they also knew that their resolve was stronger than any ship or weapon. The Vanguard fired its most powerful weapon, hitting the Imperium's shield with a deafening explosion. The fight was far from over, but humanity had already sent a message that could not be ignored. They had taken the first step in what would be an all-out war, and the galaxy would soon understand that messing with humanity was the last mistake anyone would ever make. As the battle raged on, the humans proved one undeniable truth. They had not only survived, but they had thrived. And now the galaxy was about to face the consequences of challenging them. The Council had no idea what they had awakened. The war was just beginning, and it was humanity who would decide its outcome. The Vanguard swerved through space, narrowly dodging the Imperium flagship's counterattack. Its massive shields absorbed blast after blast, but the humans were undeterred. Their ship, though smaller, was faster, more agile, made for the chaos of war. Captain Rivers watched the scene unfold through the view screen, his face a mask of determination. The Imperium, though formidable, had one glaring weakness. It wasn't designed to deal with the speed and unpredictability of humanity's tactics. "Keep the pressure on," Rivers barked. "We're wearing them down. The Imperium may be big, but it's not invincible." Lieutenant Holt stood by his side, her eyes glued to the ship's readouts. "Sir, the Imperium's shields are weakening. We can break through." Rivers nodded. "Lock in a targeting solution. I want everything we have aimed at their engines. If we cripple them, they'll be a sitting target." The Vanguard's engines roared as it pushed forward, charging into the heart of the battle. A fleet of Council ships, desperate to protect their flagship, circled the Imperium like wolves, ready to attack anything that threatened their command ship. But the humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting for something greater, revenge for the years of oppression, for the betrayal that started when they were first denied a seat at the Galactic Council. The Council had fought humanity weak, but in their arrogance, they had underestimated the human spirit. Rivers gripped the armrests of his command chair as he watched the Vanguard lock onto the Imperium's engines. A pulse of energy surged through the ship's core, and then the Vanguard unleashed its full firepower. The blast hit the Imperium's engines with a deafening explosion. For a brief moment, the entire battlefield seemed to pause, the stars around them turning a sickly red from the aftermath. "Direct hit," Holt reported, her voice tight with excitement. "Their engines are offline. They're dead in space." Rivers allowed himself a small smile, but there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from over. Without the Imperium, the Council's fleet began to fall into chaos. Ships scattered in every direction, but humanity wasn't about to let them escape. "Prepare for boarding action," Rivers ordered. "We're going in. We're finishing this." The Vanguard's crew moved quickly, their training kicking in as they prepared for the next phase. The massive ships that had once seemed so invincible were now nothing more than targets, and humanity wasn't about to let them get away. As the Vanguard cut through the enemy fleet, boarding pods were launched. The crew of the Vanguard wasn't just skilled in piloting ships, they were trained for combat on the ground. And when humanity fought, they fought with a fury no one in the galaxy could match. The first boarding pod crashed into the hull of a Council warship. The sound of metal tearing and explosions echoed through the corridors as humanity's soldiers stormed the ship, overwhelming the stunned Council forces. Their weapons were advanced, but the humans were relentless. They fought with the desperation of those who had nothing to lose, a ferocity that shook the foundations of the Council's empire. On the Vanguard, Rivers stood at the helm, his hand steady as he watched his forces tear through the Council ships. The Vanguard was a warship, but it had become a symbol of humanity's strength, of their resolve. As long as they stood, the Council would never rule the galaxy again. "We're winning this," Holt said, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. "We've turned the tide." The Council never saw this coming. Rivers didn't respond. He wasn't interested in victory speeches, not yet. There was still too much to do. The Council was vast, and this victory would only be the beginning. But as the Council's forces faltered, something became clear. Humanity had ignited a fire in the galaxy that could not be extinguished. The Council had tried to enslave them, to ignore them, to treat them as less than. Now, they would learn the true cost of their mistake. From every corner of the battlefield, the cry for justice echoed. Humanity would never kneel. And as the Vanguard continued its relentless assault, Captain Rivers could already hear the rumble of what was to come, a full-scale war, one that would either see humanity rise as the new power in the galaxy or burn everything to the ground in its fury. The Council had made their move. Now, humanity would make theirs. The battle had escalated. The Council's remaining ships scattered in disarray, retreating from the relentless onslaught of humanity. They had underestimated what humans were capable of, and now they were paying the price. But humanity had no intention of letting them escape. On the Vanguard, Captain Rivers stood at the tactical station, eyes locked on the holographic map of the battlefield. His mind raced as he assessed the situation. The Council fleet was in chaos, their remaining ships scattered, some heavily damaged, others trying to flee to distant sectors of the galaxy. But Rivers knew this victory was far from secure. The Council was resourceful, and they wouldn't take this defeat lying down. "Sir," Lieutenant Holt called, her voice filled with urgency. "We've detected reinforcements coming from the Council's capital fleet. They're sending more ships, and fast." Rivers clenched his jaw. It was just like the Council to send reinforcements at the last possible moment. But humanity had already proven their strength. They had shown that they would not be intimidated, no matter how powerful their enemies were. "Prepare the fleet," Rivers said, his voice calm but resolute. "We'll make sure they don't get a chance to regroup." The Vanguard wasn't the only ship in humanity's fleet anymore. What had started as a small group of ships had grown into a full-fledged fighting force, bolstered by the vessels humanity had captured in their battle against the Council. The humans had turned the tide, and now they had the power to take the fight to the Council's home turf. The first wave of Council reinforcements arrived. They were larger, more powerful ships, their weapons designed to crush anything in their path. But the humans weren't intimidated. They knew how to fight smarter, not just harder. Rivers watched as the incoming ships came into view on the tactical display. They were massive, too massive to be anything but a final attempt to stamp out humanity's newfound strength. The Council had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity's adaptability. "Target their engines," Rivers ordered. "We're not letting them get any closer." The Vanguard opened fire, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that tore through the vastness of space. Humanity's weapons were designed to be fast, accurate, and deadly. The Council ships didn't stand a chance as the blasts struck their engines, disabling them before they could even attempt a counterattack. The Vanguard's crew worked like a well-oiled machine. Every shot fired, every decision made, was part of a larger strategy to cripple the Council's forces. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to carve out their place in the galaxy. But the Council was not without its own tricks. As the humans pressed forward, they encountered something they hadn't expected. A new weapon, a device of unknown origin, hidden within the Council's flagship. It was a massive energy pulse that sent shockwaves through the battlefield, knocking out the power systems of several human ships. "What in the universe was that?" Holt exclaimed, her face filled with alarm as the Vanguard shuddered under the impact. "Some kind of last-ditch weapon," Rivers muttered. "Looks like they're trying to take us down with them." The Council wasn't just fighting to win, they were fighting to survive, knowing that if they lost, they would lose everything. And humanity was beginning to see the true desperation of their enemies. "We need to disable that weapon," Rivers said, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the battlefield. "We can't let them use that again." With a decisive command, Rivers directed the Vanguard toward the Council flagship, dodging incoming blasts and making their way through the remaining fleet. The energy pulse weapon was powered by a massive reactor in the core of the flagship, and it was humanity's only chance to stop it before it could wipe out their entire fleet. As the Vanguard approached the flagship, Rivers knew they were taking a massive risk. The Council would do everything in their power to defend their flagship, and humanity's ships had already taken heavy damage. But they had no choice. If the Council used that weapon again, it could turn the tide of the war in their favor. "Prepare for a direct assault," Rivers ordered. "We're going in." The Vanguard's boarding pods launched, and soon the human soldiers were storming the Council flagship. The enemy's defenses were formidable, but humanity's warriors were unmatched in determination. They fought with everything they had, cutting through the Council's forces with a ferocity that stunned even their enemies. Finally, they reached the core of the flagship. The reactor hummed with energy, and the device that powered the deadly pulse weapon loomed in front of them. "We're going to have to disable it manually," Holt said, her voice tense. "This isn't going to be easy." The human soldiers worked together, their hands moving quickly as they set charges to destroy the weapon's core. It was risky. If they failed, the weapon could fire one final shot. But they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy was at stake. With a final push, the charges were set. Humanity's soldiers made a hasty retreat as the charges detonated, collapsing the core of the weapon. The explosion sent shockwaves through the Council flagship, and the deadly energy pulse weapon was no more. But even as the Council flagship fell, Rivers knew this was just one victory in a much larger war. The Council would not go down easily. There would be more battles to come, and humanity had to be ready. The war was far from over, but humanity had taken a decisive step toward changing the course of history. The destruction of the Council flagship was a victory, but it came with a price. The explosion echoed across the galaxy, sending shockwaves through countless systems. The Council was wounded, but humanity's actions had stirred a deep anger, a rage that would spread like wildfire. The Vanguard limped back to the human base on the edge of the galaxy, its hull scorched and scarred from the battle. Captain Rivers stood on the bridge, his gaze locked on the stars outside the viewport. Even in victory, there was a sense of unease in the air. Humanity had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. It had only just begun. "Sir," Lieutenant Holt said, stepping beside him, "the Council is in disarray, but we've received reports from multiple sectors. Other galactic powers are watching. Some of them may choose to ally with the Council to strike back at us." Rivers nodded grimly. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, and humanity had just disrupted a delicate balance. The Council wasn't the only enemy humanity would have to face. There were other factions out there, ruthless species that had their own interests and were not afraid to fight for them. "What are we looking at?" Rivers asked, turning to face Holt. She opened a series of data reports on her console. "There are 3 major factions: the Krath Empire, the Vora Confederacy, and the Sorin Collective. All of them have made it clear they are watching the situation closely. If they decide to intervene, they could tip the scales against us." Rivers sighed. The Council had been a massive threat, but this was a new level of danger. These were factions with their own military might, and they weren't about to sit idly by as humanity became the most powerful force in the galaxy. "We don't have time to waste," Rivers said. "We need to gather more allies, strengthen our forces. We can't fight this war alone." But even as he spoke, he knew how difficult that would be. The galaxy wasn't exactly friendly to humans, and convincing other species to join their cause would be no easy task. In the past, humanity had been seen as insignificant, one of the newer races in the galaxy, still struggling to find its place. Now they had shaken the foundations of galactic politics, and the consequences were rippling out in all directions. "Sir," Holt continued, her voice tight, "the Krath have already issued an ultimatum. They want humanity to surrender and join their empire, or face their wrath." Rivers clenched his fists. The Krath Empire had always been one of the most feared in the galaxy, known for their brutal tactics and ruthless conquest. If they came after humanity, it would be an all-out war, and humanity wasn't ready to face them alone. "We're not going to surrender," Rivers said, his voice cold. "Tell the fleet to prepare. We're going to take the fight to them." Rivers knew that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. Humanity wasn't going to be pushed around. They had made their stand, and they would fight for their place in the stars. The next few days were a blur of activity. The human fleet, though battered, had grown stronger with every victory. Ships from all across the galaxy, fledgling nations, independent forces, and those who had grown tired of the Council's rule, began to rally behind humanity. The war for the galaxy had become a war for freedom, for control of the stars. As the human fleet prepared to take on the Krath, Rivers knew they were heading into the unknown. They didn't know what the future held, only that they had to keep fighting. The stakes had grown too high, and they couldn't afford to lose now. The battle with the Krath would be a test of everything humanity had fought for. It would determine whether the galaxy would bend to the will of those who sought power and control, or if humanity could carve out a future of their own, free from the tyranny of the old powers. Rivers stood before his crew, looking into their eyes. There was no fear in them, only determination. Humanity had already proven that it could take on the galaxy's most powerful forces, and now they would face their biggest challenge yet. "We've made it this far," Rivers said, his voice steady. "We're not stopping now. For humanity, for our future, we're going to take the fight to the Krath and show them that we are not afraid." The crew erupted into cheers, their spirits high as they prepared for the next phase of the war. The tide was turning. Humanity's actions had set a chain of events in motion that no one could stop, not even the Krath. The Krath Empire may have been the next challenge, but humanity had already proven that they were no longer just a small, insignificant species. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they were only getting stronger. The Krath Empire's forces arrived in a wave of destruction, a massive fleet that eclipsed anything humanity had ever seen. Their ships were enormous, sleek, and armed with devastating weaponry. Humanity had no choice but to face them head-on. Captain Rivers stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his mind racing with the knowledge that the fate of humanity rested on this battle. The Krath were known for their brutal tactics, and they weren't coming for a diplomatic solution. They were coming to conquer. "Sir," Lieutenant Holt said, her voice steady but edged with tension, "the Krath fleet has entered our sector. We estimate they have more than 200 ships. We've never faced anything this large before." Rivers glanced at the view screen, watching as the enemy fleet appeared like a dark cloud in the distance, slowly filling the horizon. The Krath ships were intimidating, sharp-edged behemoths that seemed to pulse with power. Every line of their design screamed hostility. "We have no choice," Rivers said, his voice firm. "We fight, or we die." The crew was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. This was no longer just about survival. It was about making a statement. Humanity would either bow to the Krath, or it would carve its own path in the galaxy. "All hands to battle stations," Rivers ordered. "Prepare for engagement. This is going to be our hardest fight yet. As the ships aligned in formation, the tension on the bridge was palpable. The Vanguard was battle-tested, but it had never faced an enemy like the Krath. The battle would be chaotic, and not all of them would make it out alive. Still, humanity had no choice but to give everything they had. The Krath struck first. Their ships fired in perfect synchrony, unleashing devastating blasts that rocked the human fleet. The Vanguard shook under the force of the attack, but it held firm, its shields holding strong. "Return fire," Rivers shouted. The human fleet retaliated, launching a volley of energy blasts that sent ripples through the Krath formation. The fight was fierce, but humanity was beginning to show that it could stand toe-to-toe with the most feared empire in the galaxy. "Captain, we're taking heavy damage," Holt called out. "Our shields are holding, but they won't last long under this kind of fire." Rivers gritted his teeth. "We're not backing down," he said. "Push forward. Take the fight to them." The Krath fleet was massive, but humanity had something they didn't: desperation, determination, and a fierce will to survive. The Krath were used to enemies crumbling before them, but humanity was proving to be different. The Vanguard weaved through enemy fire, closing the gap between the two fleets. The human ships, smaller and more agile, took advantage of their superior maneuverability. The Krath, however, relied on their sheer firepower, unleashing wave after wave of destructive blasts. "All units, focus fire on their command ship," Rivers ordered. "If we can take that down, the rest of their fleet will fall apart." The fleet responded, coordinating their attacks with precision. They knew that this battle was their chance to show the galaxy they would not go down without a fight. Humanity was fighting for more than just survival. It was fighting for its place in the stars. The command ship of the Krath Empire, a massive vessel known as the Dreadstorm, loomed ahead, heavily armored and brimming with weapons. It was the heart of their fleet, and if it fell, the Krath would be thrown into disarray. "Captain, we've lost contact with several of our ships," Holt reported. "We're down to half strength." Rivers' heart sank, but he refused to show weakness. "Hold the line," he said, his voice unyielding. "We take down that command ship, and we'll turn the tide." The battle raged on, with the human fleet giving everything it had. Every blast fired, every maneuver executed, was a testament to the resolve of humanity. They had no choice but to fight with every ounce of their being. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Dreadstorm began to falter. Its shields were weakening, and the human fleet took advantage of the opening. With a final, coordinated strike, the Dreadstorm was brought down in a massive explosion. The shockwave rippled through the Krath fleet, causing chaos and confusion. "Target the remaining ships," Rivers shouted. "Keep pressing the attack." As the Krath fleet began to crumble, humanity's ships pressed on, determined to finish what they had started. The battle was far from over, but the Krath had lost their edge. The tide had turned. Captain Rivers stood tall on the bridge, watching as the Krath ships scattered. Humanity had taken down the most feared empire in the galaxy's history, and they had done it together. The victory was hard-earned, but it sent a message across the stars. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. But Rivers knew this was just the beginning. The Krath were down, but they wouldn't be the last enemy humanity faced. There were others out there, waiting for their turn. For now, humanity had won the day, but the war was far from over. The aftermath of the battle against the Krath was nothing short of chaotic. The Vanguard and the other ships in humanity's fleet were battered and broken, their hulls scarred with the marks of the brutal fight. But despite the damage, humanity had emerged victorious, and the galaxy was forced to take notice. "Captain Rivers," Lieutenant Holt said, stepping onto the bridge with a serious expression. "The Krath fleet has been scattered. We've won, but we've lost over 40% of our fleet. What's our next move?" Rivers, still standing at the helm, glanced out at the stars. He felt a strange mix of triumph and unease. Yes, they had taken down the Krath, but they had paid a heavy price for it. And what would happen now? With the Krath Empire in ruins, there were bound to be new threats. The galaxy had been shaken, and it wouldn't be long before others tried to fill the power vacuum. "We rebuild," Rivers said, his voice resolute. "We tend to our wounded and make sure the surviving ships are ready to go. But we don't rest. Not yet." As humanity's ships limped back to their base on Earth, there was a quiet sense of relief, though no one was ready to celebrate. The war had just begun, and the Krath were only the first of many enemies humanity would have to face. Back on Earth, the aftermath was even more complicated. The Krath were not just an enemy force, they were a symbol. Their defeat marked a shift in the balance of power across the galaxy. The Galactic Council, once a governing body that held the galaxy's most powerful species in check, was now in shambles. The Krath had been a major force within the Council, and with them gone, the question was, who would rise to take their place? Humanity, now recognized as a force to be reckoned with, faced a crossroads. The Council, weakened and disarrayed, sent messages to Earth, trying to patch things up, to extend a hand in peace. "We're not interested in peace," a spokesperson for the human leaders stated bluntly. "You've seen what happens when you provoke us. We'll defend ourselves, and we'll do it on our own terms." It was a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity had done more than just survive the battle against the Krath. They had set a new standard. The war might be over for now, but the consequences were far-reaching, and the Council would have to adapt to the new order. As the Krath lost their grip, more species began to eye humanity. Some were curious, some were afraid, but all were uncertain about the future. The galaxy, for the first time in centuries, was in a state of flux, and no one knew where the chips would fall. On the battlefield, humanity had shown its strength. But now, as the debris of the war settled, it was clear. The true test of humanity's strength would come not from the battles fought with weapons, but from the decisions made in the aftermath. Would humanity continue to fight for its place, or would it try to create peace in a galaxy that had never known it? Captain Rivers sat in his quarters, reviewing the data and reports coming in from all corners of the galaxy. It was clear that the defeat of the Krath was a game-changer, but it had also ignited something within the galaxy, a new kind of fear. Humanity wasn't just another species to be ruled or ignored. It was a threat that couldn't be easily dismissed. "We've made our mark," Rivers muttered to himself. But the hardest part is yet to come. As the human fleet repaired and rearmed, a new chapter began for Earth. The Krath were no longer the galaxy's apex predators. But that didn't mean the galaxy was safe. With the Krath shattered, and no one yet able to take their place, the galaxy's future was uncertain. In the coming months, humans found themselves increasingly called upon by other species who sought their alliance or feared their power. The message from Earth was simple: humanity would never be controlled again. "Stay strong, and don't back down," Captain Rivers said to his crew as they prepared for whatever came next. "We've shown the galaxy that we are not just survivors, we are the future." But as humanity moved forward, a new, more terrifying reality awaited them. New enemies were already emerging from the shadows, watching and waiting for their turn. The Krath had been just the beginning. Humanity had proven itself to be a force of nature, but now it had to contend with the consequences of its power. The galaxy would never be the same again, and the true test for humanity was yet to come.